The role of the police in any society is fundamentally to maintain order, enforce laws, and protect citizens. In the United States, policing has evolved over centuries, shaped by history, politics, and social dynamics. Ideally, law enforcement officers serve as guardians of public safety, upholding justice and constitutional rights. But what if this balance were lost? What if police forces in the US were to transform into tyrannical entities, wielding unchecked power and suppressing freedoms? What would the consequences be for society, democracy, civil rights, and everyday life? This hypothetical yet increasingly relevant question invites deep reflection. Around the world and within US history, abuses of police power have led to social unrest, human rights violations, and systemic oppression. Examining the possibility of a police tyranny in the United States requires us to understand the nature of tyranny itself, the current state of law enforcement, and the mechanisms that either enable or restrain authoritarian practices. Tyranny, in political philosophy, refers to oppressive rule characterized by the concentration of power in the hands of an individual or group who govern without regard for laws, justice, or citizens' rights. When police become tyrants, their role shifts from protectors to oppressors. They enforce compliance not through fair application of laws, but through fear, violence, and intimidation. In the US context, this transformation would represent a catastrophic breakdown of democratic norms, constitutional safeguards, and the rule of law. It would impact every facet of society: communities, government institutions, civil liberties, and the national psyche. To comprehend the implications, we first consider the current landscape of policing in the United States. The US has one of the highest rates of police per capita among developed countries, with over 18,000 law enforcement agencies nationwide. Policing is highly decentralized, with local, state, and federal agencies operating under various jurisdictions. While many officers perform their duties honorably, issues such as racial profiling, excessive use of force, militarization of police, lack of accountability, and systemic bias have been persistent concerns. High-profile incidents of police violence, particularly against minority communities, have sparked widespread protests and calls for reform. If these problems were to escalate unchecked, and if law enforcement leadership embraced authoritarian tactics rather than reform, the result could be a police tyranny. In such a scenario, the police would no longer serve the community's interests, but would act as enforcers of an oppressive regime, suppressing dissent and controlling citizens through coercion. One immediate consequence would be the erosion of civil liberties. Rights guaranteed by the Constitution, freedom of speech, assembly, privacy, and protection from unreasonable search and seizure, would be trampled. Police might conduct warrantless raids, surveil citizens indiscriminately, and silence protests with brutal force. Communities would live under constant fear, with arbitrary arrests and violence becoming commonplace. Trust between police and the public would disintegrate, making cooperation impossible and undermining public safety. Marginalized groups already vulnerable would suffer disproportionately as racial and economic disparities are amplified. The justice system itself would be compromised. Police tyranny often entails collusion with prosecutors and judges, undermining due process. Innocent people could be detained or convicted based on coerced confessions or fabricated evidence. Legal protections would be hollowed out. Social unrest and resistance movements would likely surge in response to repression. History shows that oppressive policing breeds backlash, riots, civil disobedience, and sometimes armed conflict. The government might respond with increased militarization and harsh crackdowns, escalating violence further. Politically, a police tyranny could destabilize the entire democratic system. Elected officials might be sidelined or co-opted, and authoritarian leaders could use the police to silence opposition. Checks and balances would erode, and the separation of powers might collapse. Economically, widespread fear and instability would deter investment and business activity. Communities under heavy surveillance and violence would see diminished opportunities, worsening inequality. The social fabric would fray as neighbors grow suspicious and fearful. Internationally, a police tyranny in the US would damage its reputation as a defender of human rights and democracy. allies might distance themselves, and adversaries could exploit the chaos for geopolitical gain. To prevent such a dire outcome, robust institutional safeguards must be maintained. Independent oversight bodies, civilian review boards, transparent investigations, and accountability mechanisms are critical. Training programs that emphasize community engagement, de-escalation, and cultural competence can reduce the likelihood of abuses. Technology could be a double-edged sword. Body cameras and data analytics can increase transparency, but could also be used for mass surveillance and control if misused. Public awareness and advocacy are essential to ensure technology protects rights rather than infringes upon them. The role of elected officials is pivotal. Legislators and executives must resist any encroachments on civil liberties and fund reforms that promote justice and equity. Community leaders and activists also play a vital role in holding police accountable and shaping policies. Education about constitutional rights and civic engagement empowers citizens to resist tyranny. Legal aid organizations, the media, and the judiciary must remain vigilant defenders of justice. In the worst-case scenario where police tyranny takes root, resistance movements may arise. These could range from peaceful protests to organized civil disobedience and possibly insurgency. History's lessons from authoritarian regimes remind us that tyranny is never sustainable in the long term without overwhelming force and suppression. Rebuilding trust and restoring democracy after police tyranny would be a monumental task. Truth and reconciliation commissions, institutional reforms, and reparations might be necessary to heal divisions. In everyday life, police tyranny would alter how Americans interact with each other and their government. Fear of surveillance and reprisal would stifle free expression and innovation. Families might discourage activism, and marginalized communities would face systemic exclusion. Media freedom would likely be curtailed, limiting information flow and enabling propaganda. This would deepen polarization and misinformation. The psychological impact on society would be profound. Living under constant threat of arbitrary arrest or violence breeds trauma, anxiety, and mistrust. Generations could grow up cynical about justice and governance. It's important to note that the trajectory toward police tyranny is not inevitable. It depends on choices made by society, institutions, and leaders. Active civic participation, transparency, and respect for human rights are powerful counterbalances. The complexity of modern policing, balancing crime prevention, community service, and civil liberties, requires ongoing dialogue and adaptation. The risks of tyranny underscore the urgency of reforms and the preservation of democratic norms. This exploration of a hypothetical police tyranny in the United States serves as a cautionary tale and a call to action. It highlights the critical importance of accountability, oversight, and public engagement in policing. While the concept may seem extreme, understanding its potential helps society remain vigilant against abuses of power. The health of American democracy depends on it. Thank you for watching this in-depth analysis. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more content exploring critical social, political, and historical topics.